So some fun facts about Vignesh first. He wanted to be a tennis player and he was number 15 in India before he actually joined startups and that changed his trajectory. And apart from that, he has been a Carnatic singer for the last 23 years. Probably at the end of it, we may ask him to sing to close the session as a musical, theatrical
No,
ending.
we'll skip that.
Oh, we'll skip that, okay. So, quick thing, Vignesh. We all talk about emerging technology, frontier technology, industrial revolution 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0.
Sure.
ये सब है क्या?
So, firstly, very grateful to be here. Thank you to Abhishek and, of course, Pallav for hosting us. I think from an industry 4.0 perspective, to answer your question, this is going to be a little bit of a history lesson. We'll probably start at like the Stone Age, then the medieval age, and then the industrial age, and then the green revolution, and then the manufacturing revolution, and then finally we come to the internet age, and then we come to the intelligence age, right? So now I've just thrown these terms out there, but largely speaking, if you take a look back at like human history from, let's say, 1500 or 1600, each successive age that I've just mentioned has lasted only 50% of the time or less than its previous avatar, if you will, right? So like the Stone Age lasted for like 1,000 years, and then the medieval age was maybe about 400-500 years. The Renaissance age was like a couple of hundred years. Then there was the industrial age, which was maybe 60-70 years, and then there was the internet age, which is the last 30 years. And then now we're seeing, let's say, the intelligence age in terms of the next, 5-10 years. But the cycles have compressed because human progress has also compressed itself into a shorter time span in terms of being able to manifest itself. In that sense, the frontier tech that was 20 years back was, let's say, I know Web3 was the topic less than 30 minutes ago, but Web2 in terms of internet, or Web1 in terms of just having a network infrastructure. Today, Industry 4.0 is probably referring to things like the buzzwords we all hear about, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, Internet of Things, like all these like amazing terms that frankly no one cares about, right? Like it's nice almost to put on a deck or plaster because if you say it, founders sometimes say it because they feel like they ought to, even if there isn't actually an element of that business, core to the whatever product they're building. But all of these terms largely are what constitute Industry 4.0 in the true sense of the word. Many applications like AI, ML, or NLP, all of these terms, the crucial thing to remember about anything that is industry functional is that it's not sector specific, it's not market specific, it's not product specific. It's actually agnostic to everything that we do. So pretty much any industry you can take, from retail to real estate to manufacturing to internet first SaaS, all of these can utilize Industry 4.0 whenever they choose to.
Interesting. So
Sorry, that was a very long-winded,
we love it.
historical background, but I think the context was necessary.
Absolutely. So when we talk about Industry 1.0 and 2.0, like if we go back into civilization, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, India was at the forefront of adopting large-scale drainage and everything. But यहाँ पे when we look at Industry 4.0 and we talk about all these so-called buzzwords, whether it's drone, nanotech, AI, NLP,
Sure.
कहाँ दिखता है ये? Like where is it hiding in the India or Bharat story?
So it's not hiding because it's not there. And it's frankly because, to put it very bluntly, Bharat can't afford Industry 4.0 today, right? Like it's, see, these terms and these labels have largely been invented by folks like us who are sitting in an AC room or, on stage and coming up with these things because it's cool. And it is cool, I'm not saying it's not, but the relevance of it to real world businesses or to actually applying it into, and I say this as like a hardcore, like tech first VC, right? Like, it's frankly, we are still very much in India milking the $50,000 GDP per capita cow. And that is the cow that is continuing to be milked because that's the only cow that we believe can be milked. And, not to take the cow analogy any further than that, but the idea is that there are many Indias, but there are two stark Indias, right? In terms of Bharat and India, if I'm going to put it that way. The GDP per capita, $50,000 Indian, if you take that constituent of India away, then GDP per capita in India is not the $2,500 that we say it is, but it's actually $600, which means at an average household, composition of between 4 to 4.5 adults, you're effectively talking about a household income translating to roughly 20 to 30,000 rupees a month. Now, if you go to somebody at 20 to 30,000 rupees a month and say industry 4.0, it's going to be laughable at best and will probably like get kicked out of their house at worst. So the fundamental way in which we build actually has to change, in the sense that, okay, these functional technologies are there. And this is also, I think, one of the consequences of actually having learned from, let's say, earlier or more mature startup ecosystems like in the US, where these technologies first came into the consumer mainstream. But what happened actually after that was we tried to ape not only the technologies, but we started aping the products themselves. And so for a simple example, let's say, and I'm going to risk talking about a very controversial industry here, food delivery. If we take, for example, the applications of AI in food delivery to optimize routes for people to deliver food on time at a cheap price, यार यहाँ का order value है US का tip. So the way in which we look at a DoorDash average order value and we look at a Swiggy average order value cannot be looked at from the perspective of a DoorDash or the perspective of a Swiggy. It has to be looked at from the perspective of who is ordering on Swiggy in India versus who is ordering on DoorDash in the US. So that shift and the empathy to sort of seeing, is the market that I am operating in actually utilizing industry 4.0, or forget 4.0, 3.0 or anything else, that in itself is not yet, that's not the case in India yet. So to answer your question again in a very long-winded fashion, sorry, I think it's time to put the customer first, not the technology first, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. So, but if you look at some of the cases where India has sort of put all the other countries behind, is in places like fintech, and where we have had a lot of digital adoption of technologies. So how do you sort of look at different industries where different sort of emerging technologies have been adopted by both India and Bharat, and what are the nuances of it?
Sure. So great point, actually, because fintech is one of those most necessary parts of social infrastructure that you can't avoid in any economic system. If you look at, again, every great city, and I'm going to keep drawing from history, sorry, but when you look at any historical example of a city or an infrastructure, urban infrastructure that's been built, whether it was cities like the great cities we think of today, like, London or New York or any of the big megalopolises, they all had the ability to start from a clean slate at some point, right? Like, you had either the Great Fire of London, or you had like, Manhattan as an island that was empty where somebody could actually go and stick poles in order to build a city. In financial services, in fact, there is a competitor to India that is actually leapfrogged India many times over in terms of things like mobile money, and that is Africa. Like, for example, if we look at examples of companies like M-Pesa that have been building in Kenya for the last 25 years in terms of mobile money. Now, to me, those are fintech companies. India's largest fintech company is probably NPCI, right? Which has basically created a platform for financial infrastructure, the likes of which have never been seen before, and now that's even being exported to other countries, right? Like it's not just a local play anymore or a domestic play anymore. In the fintech space, we had the luxury, unlike in the US, of not having the majority of our merchant base or our consumer base stuck on Swift or on Visa or MasterCard. We had the ability to actually leapfrog an entire generation of technology simply by building from scratch. So that building from scratch is an opportunity that comes once in every generation when you have nothing else preceding it. And we had that in India for the last 20 years, and therefore NPCI, therefore UPI, therefore the ability for us to now say, hey, our user experience in India to spend money is much, 100x better than sending money to somebody else in the US locally, for example.
Interesting. So what do these emerging technologies mean for India? I mean, we look at like different vectors like job creation, We also look at technology sort of replacing existing jobs, and we are talking about, hey, how do people who are displaced by technology, and especially emerging technologies, would find a job? Like the same old philosophy of when internet came, the typewriter writers were out of job, or when cars came, horses were out of job. What does this mean in the larger landscape of India? Because there's a spectrum where new technologies come. They're able to do a lot of things better, like drone in farming or defense. Then we're talking about IoT in manufacturing.
Sure.
What does this landscape look like, and where do you see this being adopted in India, and what's the overall landscape?
Okay, that was a big question.
It's a loaded one.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
a very loaded question. So, in India, the majority of businesses are not digital, right? It's still the truth. Also in India, we've been saying for 25 years, look, the kirana is going to become obsolete. It has not become obsolete, just as an example. The only thing that teaches me from, I think, having seen people make claims about a particular market or a particular technology, and then that claim having basically not been proven across now nearly 2 decades of the internet ecosystem or the internet penetration being active in India, is that it's not our view on the market that has to change. It's not our view on the customer that has to change. It is our definition of technology itself that has to change. For a very long time now, technology has just been considered software, right? And we have basically equivalent technology as a word to software as a product. And most of the investing activity we see in India over the last generation, or even in the US for that matter, has always been in startup activity, in digital companies, have been software companies. And software is easy, sure. It's obviously the easiest, most scalable thing to leverage. Code is, of course, infinite leverage, and it's great to be able to invest in it. But technology at a fundamental level just means the how of anything, right? And if you want technology, if you want Industry 4.0, if you want innovation as an attitude in every business in India, in every household and consumer habit in India, then the definition of technology doesn't have to change, it has to expand. And it has to expand to include not just software, but also hardware, also data. See, in India, we're not used to calling stores hardware. We call them stores. We're not used to calling patient health records on a slip in Darbhanga, Bihar, for example, as data. But the moment that comes into the utilizable mainstream where you can build a solution on top of it, then the definition of what technology is actually changes. And the only behavioral change that I hope that we'll be able to build in India over the next 10 years will be not just building for the top 20 million people who have effectively been served quite well already. I don't think Pallav or myself, need to today have one more app to download and one more luxury, so to speak, as a service to use. But truly, for technology to actually achieve its potential, it needs to reach the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time. But we are not the greatest number of people. The greatest number of people are those who haven't had access to that technology yet. And so the future of the consumer internet in India will be not digital, but phygital in nature, because it will be much more holistic, and it will necessarily have to involve, if you want to attack the revenue opportunity and if you want to attack the market potential that India truly offers to all builders, then we will have to adapt technology itself as a mechanism to say, now don't just build software products. Let's talk about how you can intervene with software or with hardware or with data wherever necessary.
Interesting. So you're talking about the shift in consumer behavior. And here in India, technology still has to be overlaid with some human element, which is what we call phygital. Whereas in developed countries, just the digital works. Where do you see this going? Like one of your statement is omnichannel is not just about sales. And if you overlap that with consumer behavior and the changing technology trends,
right,
how do you see that going, and what does that mean for India?
So it has been harder to make hardware scalable than it has been to make software scalable, right? And that's the reason why we have not found venture fundable or investable businesses in hardware or in data yet, relative to, let's say, software businesses, because those have been easier to do because the internet was first software. It was not a hardware platform. But with Internet of Things as an Industry 4.0 term, now what IoT effectively is trying to do, for example, is build a network infrastructure of hardware that is now talking to each other over a network, right? Like it's not dumb hardware, it's smart hardware. If that kind of is the future, and we know that the technology exists today, then phygital is basically the only balanced way to understand technology and utilize it, not just focus on only one aspect of it, because we are not going to, this philosophy we have of, at least, build it and they will come, right? No, they're not going to come. Yeah? Like, we have to go understand the consumer and build for them in the habits that they are used to. And that takes a certain amount of empathy and a certain amount of actually work to go and understand how those consumers behave. Because, like I mentioned earlier, the $50,000 GDP per capita Indian behaves very differently to a $600 per capita Indian. In fact, they're poles apart in terms of consumer behavior. So if we don't go phygital, can we reach every Indian? I don't think so.
Very interesting. So now, let's say if you're a business owner sitting in this audience and you're like, ये दुनिया जहाँ के नए technology आते रहते हैं, how the f do I keep a track of it? And what should I do to be not scared of how this is going to impact my business?
Okay, so technology doesn't actually impact businesses, right? Only customers do. So in that sense, every successful business was never built, or most successful businesses or technologies for that matter, were never built because somebody wanted to come and build a technology or build a business. They built it because they wanted to solve a problem. And I would say for any business owner, irrespective of sector, whether it is traditional manufacturing, whether it is real estate, whether it is software for that matter, what is the problem that is currently being solved? And what are the tools available to me today in order to help solve that problem better? And as long as I start with the problem, then the answer will come naturally. And in some cases, the answer is to just wait and do nothing at all, because there are lots of technologies, for example, where you can say things like drone delivery, right? But mostly, whether for regulatory reasons or for economic reasons, it's kind of difficult to find a commercial use case for certain technologies yet, and that's fine. But the important thing is, are you solving a problem or are you creating it just because you want to create? And so that dichotomy is how I would at least look at it from a business owner's perspective today. Like if I'm running a traditional business in India today, in let's say the manufacturing space, and I'm scared by what I read or I feel FOMO because I read headlines in the newspapers and think, oh crap, I mean, all this cool stuff's happening, but how is this relevant for me, or how am I relevant to this space? I think the answer is you don't have to worry about it. Just focus on your business, but then always be open to the idea that, look, if change comes, I'm going to be open to accepting it. And for the customer I'm solving a problem for today, is there something available today that allows me to solve the same problem better? And as long as that outlook is there, I think businesses will continue to innovate. See, let's take the Kirana as an example, right? Like, I mean, they've existed in a particular way for 30 years. Now, I don't know a single app, that they're not using in terms of saying, how do I become a better business and how do I grow my income? And that doesn't mean the Kirana has died. It has evolved because it's just adapted to whatever is available, but whatever is also applicable and relevant for them at that point in time and makes sense commercially.
Got it. Given that we have a minute, let's do a loaded last question. Sure. What do you think? So right now we have the Swiggies and Zomatos and the Paytm as the unicorns that we look up to. What are the kind of startups you think who are using emerging technologies that will be the star of Indian startup ecosystem in the next 10, 15, 20 years? And what are the frontier technologies India has not even seen adoption yet?
Okay, frontier technologies is an easy question to answer, so I'll go with that first. I mean, like things like true AI, where you have completely eliminated human intervention, the need for human intervention in at least one solid, scalable commercial use case. It could be something as simple as like medical transcription at a pharmacy. It could be something as complicated as AI for underwriting a loan in real time. It could, I mean, so artificial intelligence is one classic example. And also the importance of, saying don't look for improvements in these technologies, 10x every 5 years. Sometimes what is crucially important to understand about an AI or an ML or any of these industry 4.0 terms is that they're very iterative in nature. So small, consistent improvements every day in technology, as in life, in most things, generally help build better systems than leapfrogging or hoping for very large improvements in very large amounts of time. So that is one piece of tech. The other could be something like, for example, quantum computing or edge computing for that matter, or real-time network infrastructure, or mesh networks, or drone delivery, or climate science for that matter, or even something as way out of whack as nuclear
Advanced
fusion.
materials, nanoparticles.
Nanoparticles, biofuels, right? Like these are all things that, just like people thought the internet was crazy 25 years ago, we're not going to, these will get adopted into the mainstream much quicker than we think over the next 10 years for sure. And, we should be cognizant of that as both, entrepreneurs and as consumers. The other second part of your question is, as a consequence, actually, what will, let's say, the startup landscape in India look like in 2030? Look, man, like I can't predict the future, but honestly, I think the next generation of companies are going to look very different to the previous generation of companies, because they're going to be building for a very different kind of customer and very different kind of consumer. Because the last 10 years have been about internet penetration and showing what is possible. Now, the next 10 years are about actually doing what is necessary, because that is the fundamental shift, right? Like, in a sense, I mean, I was told that one-liners would be expected from me. So I'm going to say, the last 10 years of startups were largely doing dhan seva. Now I think the next 10 years should hopefully do jan seva in terms of what consumers actually in India really want.
That's a perfect line to end this session with. Thank you, everyone. I think we are out of time.
Thanks.